All right, so today, let's do a deep dive into something I think we'll both find pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Anarchism. Now, most people, I think, when they hear that word, they probably think chaos,
Yeah.
black masks, maybe some property damage.
Right.
But I think,
The stereotypical image.
exactly, this stereotypical image. But what if
Yeah.
that's just a Hollywood cliche?
Yeah.
What if anarchism is really about,
What if it's about...
reimagining
Yeah.
society basically from the ground up?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's about asking,
Right.
what if we could live in a world without imposed authority?
Right.
What if power flowed from the bottom up?
Okay, so that's what we're going to try to find out today
Yeah.
for this deep dive.
That's the question.
We're using a source.
Yeah.
It's a document just called pasted text.
Okay.
And it looks like it's like a really thorough overview of what anarchist thought is all about.
Sounds good.
So
Yeah, let's get into...
buckle up, because we're about to explore a philosophy that really challenges, I think, like the very foundations of how we think about power and control and all that.
It challenges the assumptions that we make
Yeah.
about how society should be organized.
Okay, so first things first,
Yeah.
let's just define this word. Anarchism.
Okay.
What is it? What's the real deal? Beyond all the
Yeah.
sensationalized headlines and all that.
Anarchism, at its core, is about abolishing hierarchical structures,
Okay.
especially the state, and replacing them with systems that are based on
Okay.
voluntary cooperation, mutual aid, and individual freedom.
Okay, so less about, Molotov cocktails and more about actually
Less about chaos
yeah.
and more about a radical reimagining
Oh, okay.
of how societies could function.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So, but if everyone's calling the shots, I mean, doesn't that just lead to
I hate chaos, right?
yeah,
It's the-
chaos?
That's the common misconception.
Yeah.
But anarchists would argue that true order
Okay.
doesn't come from top-down authority.
Right.
It comes from a shared sense of responsibility and a
Oh.
commitment to working together.
So it's more about community
Yeah.
and people being invested in each other's well-being.
Precisely. Yeah.
Right.
Think of it like a community garden,
Yeah.
right? Everyone participates in the decisions about what to plant, how to take care of the space,
Okay,
how to distribute, the harvest.
I see.
It's a model of self-management and shared responsibility.
That's interesting because it makes me think about
Yeah.
my neighborhood,
Hell
actually.
yeah.
After that big storm we had last year.
All right.
Everyone came together, helping each other clear debris,
Oh, wow.
sharing tools, checking in on the elderly folks.
Yeah.
It was like a real display of mutual aid.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Right.
And that's exactly what anarchists would point to. They would say that humans have an inherent capacity for cooperation
Yeah.
and solidarity, especially in times of need.
Right. So this isn't just some modern fringe idea or anything.
Wow, not at all.
Where does this come from? Historically, where are the roots of this?
So anarchism has its roots in the Enlightenment,
Okay.
but it really started to take shape as a distinct philosophy in the 19th century with thinkers like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon,
Okay.
Mikhail Bakunin, Emma Goldman, and Peter Kropotkin.
Oh, Proudhon. Property is theft, right?
Yeah, he's the one.
Yeah, that quote has always been so interesting to me, especially in our digital age.
Right.
Makes you think about intellectual property, data ownership.
Absolutely. It's more relevant than ever.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was Proudhon's take on that?
So Proudhon wasn't necessarily against all forms of property.
Okay.
He was critiquing the kind that arises from exploitation and inequality. He envisioned this system called mutualism, where individuals and cooperatives would exchange goods and services
Okay.
based on their labor.
I see.
So it ensured a more equitable distribution of resources.
So it's not just about abolishing private property altogether. It's more
Right.
about rethinking
Exactly.
how we own, how we
Yeah.
share resources
Yeah.
in a way that's fair.
In a just way. Yeah.
Okay. What about Bakunin?
Yeah.
Didn't he want to get rid of both the state and capitalism?
Yeah, he was pretty radical.
I mean, that seems pretty radical,
Yeah.
even for anarchists.
Yeah, he was a firm believer in what's called collectivist anarchism.
Okay.
He saw both the state and capitalism as inherently oppressive forces
Okay.
that needed to be dismantled in order to achieve true liberation.
Okay.
So his vision was a society
Yeah.
where the means of production are collectively owned and managed by the people,
Okay.
ensuring that everyone benefits from the labor.
So that's appealing, I think, to a lot of people who feel like the current system is kind of exploiting them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, now Emma Goldman, that's a name that you still hear a lot today,
Oh, absolutely.
especially among feminists.
Yeah.
So how did she contribute to anarchist thought?
So Goldman was a huge advocate for anarcho-feminism.
Okay.
She saw the fight for women's liberation as being like completely connected to the struggle against all forms of hierarchy,
Okay,
including patriarchy.
I see.
She argued that true freedom for women
Yeah,
could only be achieved by dismantling all systems of oppression,
okay.
not just those related to gender.
So she was really like a revolutionary
Yeah.
thinker in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely.
And again, her ideas still resonate today
Yeah.
with so many movements, like social justice movements and things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, and finally we have Peter Kropotkin,
Yes.
famous for his theory of mutual aid.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't he challenge like that whole
Yeah, he really challenged the
survival of the fittest idea?
survival of the fittest narrative
Yeah.
through his study of both human and animal societies.
Okay.
He argued that cooperation and mutual aid are just as,
Okay.
if not more, prevalent than competition.
Oh, interesting.
In nature, yeah.
So basically he's saying we're wired to help each other,
Yeah, essentially.
not just compete for resources.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of a hopeful perspective.
It is.
Okay, so anarchism,
Yeah.
it's not just like this one kind of monolithic ideology, is it?
That's a great point.
Are all anarchists like on the same page about everything?
No, not at all.
thought-
Anarchism, just like any political philosophy, has evolved over time.
Okay.
And it's given rise to various branches
Okay.
with distinct perspectives and approaches.
So there are different types of
That's
anarchism.
exactly.
Okay, so maybe we could unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
All right, let's do that.
Okay.
Let's unpack these different flavors of anarchy.
All right.
Let's do it.
Sounds good. So we're back and ready to get into the different types of anarchism.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see like how all these principles we talked about actually play out in different like schools of thought.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So where do we start?
Well, I think a good place to start is with anarcho-communism.
Anarcho-communism.
Okay. This is one of the more well-known branches.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, think of a system where private property is abolished
Okay.
and resources are distributed based on need,
Okay.
not like merit or contribution.
So everyone's just sharing everything?
In essence, yeah.
I mean, that sounds pretty utopian.
Right.
But like, how could that actually work in the real world?
Yeah, that's a question anarchists have grappled with for centuries.
Right.
The idea is that by removing the scarcity mindset
Yep.
that's fostered by capitalism,
Right.
we can create a society where everyone has access to the things they need
Okay.
to thrive.
So it's more about changing our values.
Yeah, shifting from competition to cooperation.
Okay, so instead of worrying about like paying rent
Right.
or like healthcare bills,
Exactly.
those things just become like basic human rights.
Yeah, they're not treated as commodities.
Okay, that's pretty radical.
It is a radical idea,
Yep.
but that's the essence of anarcho-communism.
Okay, so what about,
Now, on the other end of the spectrum,
okay,
you have individualist anarchism.
individualist anarchy?
This one places a much higher value on individual autonomy,
Okay.
freedom of choice.
So less about the collective,
Yeah,
more about like self-reliance.
exactly.
Okay.
Individualist anarchists tend to be skeptical of any kind of collectivism,
Okay.
even if it's voluntary.
Even if it's voluntary, interesting.
Yeah,
So they're more about like free markets,
right. Free
voluntary
market.
association, things like that.
Yeah, personal responsibility.
Okay, so it seems like there's a lot of tension
Oh, absolutely.
between those two branches.
Yeah.
You know, like how do you balance individual freedom with like what the community needs?
That's a constant point of debate within anarchism.
Right.
Some argue that you can only have true individual freedom
Okay.
if you have a supportive community.
Okay.
Others say that any form of collective decision-making
Yeah.
is going to infringe on individual liberty.
So there's no easy answer.
No easy answers. Yeah, it's a complex issue.
So even within anarchism,
Mm-hmm.
there's like disagreements and debates.
Yeah, exactly.
Not like this-
on a lift.
Yeah, one size fits all kind of thing.
No, not at all.
Okay, that's actually kind of refreshing.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about
Well, another brand.
anarcho-syndicalism?
Yeah, anarcho-syndicalism.
This one seems like really relevant today
Yeah, especially with
with all the stuff going on with labor.
the gig economy and all that.
Yeah, exactly. So what's that all about?
So anarcho-syndicalism focuses on workers,
Okay.
empowering them to control the means of production
Okay.
and to make decisions democratically
Okay.
without relying on bosses or managers.
So it's like that thing that happened with the auto parts factory in Argentina
Oh, yeah, yeah.
where the workers like took over.
Right. They took over the factory.
Yeah, after it was abandoned.
Yeah.
They formed a cooperative,
It did?
elected their own leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and like actually turned it into a profitable business.
Yeah, and that's a great example of anarcho-syndicalism in action.
Right.
It shows how workers can take control
Yes.
of their own destinies, basically.
And create like more equitable workplaces.
Exactly.
Okay, so why isn't this model like more widespread?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
especially with how,
With how things are going.
yeah, like traditional jobs are kind of falling apart.
Right.
More people are doing gig work.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more relevant.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about
Sure.
eco-anarchism.
Eco-anarchism, okay.
This one seems especially important with everything that's going on with the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a growing branch of anarchism.
Yeah.
So essentially, it links anarchist principles
Okay.
to environmentalism.
All right.
It advocates for sustainable practices,
Okay.
decentralized communities,
Mm-hmm.
and a rejection of like industrial capitalism's exploitation of nature.
So it's more than just like hugging trees. It's about like actually,
It's about a fundamental shift.
yeah, like rethinking our relationship
Yeah, our relationship with the planet.
to nature.
Yeah.
Okay, so like what are some examples of that?
So think things like permaculture,
Okay.
renewable energy cooperatives, community-owned land trusts.
Okay.
These are all things that eco-anarchists are doing.
To put their ideals into practice.
Exactly. They're putting their principles into practice.
Okay, so it's like, what if instead of measuring our success by like GDP,
Right.
we measured it by like biodiversity,
Yeah,
clean air and water,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our values.
community resilience?
Exactly. It's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, the problems are huge,
They are.
but it's also kind of empowering to think that
Right.
maybe by changing our relationship with nature,
Yeah.
we could actually start to change things.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected,
Right.
and our survival depends on the health of the whole ecosystem.
That's a good point. Okay, so we've got
And then finally,
eco-anarchism,
we have anarcho-feminism.
anarcho-feminism, right?
Yeah, we touched on Emma Goldman earlier,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to highlight how this branch
Yeah.
continues to influence feminism today.
Yeah, it's about how like patriarchy
Exactly.
and hierarchical power structures
Yeah.
are like totally intertwined.
They're interconnected, yeah.
So to liberate women, you have to kind of dismantle both.
You have to address both systems.
Right.
Yeah, so anarcho-feminists see the fight for gender equality
Yeah.
as part of this larger struggle
Okay.
against all forms of domination
Right.
and oppression.
So it's not just about women's issues.
Right.
It's about creating a more just world for everyone.
Exactly. It's about challenging all forms of injustice.
Which brings us back to those core principles. Challenging authority,
Yeah.
embracing mutual aid,
Absolutely.
creating systems based on like cooperation.
Yeah, cooperation and consent. Those are the foundation of everything we've been talking about,
Yeah.
whether it's economics, the environment, patriarchy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of different branches.
We have, yeah.
But what about like the philosophy itself?
Okay.
What are the big ideas?
Yeah, what are the underlying principles?
Yeah, that like underpin all these approaches.
Well, one of the most important is the critique of authority.
Okay, the critique of authority. So what does that mean?
So anarchists believe that any form of power,
Yes.
whether it's political, economic, social,
Mm-hmm.
needs to be justified.
Okay.
They question any authority that isn't based on consent
But
or necessity.
so it's not just about saying no to everything.
Right.
It's about really thinking critically
Exactly.
about how power works.
Yeah.
And like who has it
Yeah. And whether it's legitimate.
and whether it's actually like serving the people.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about
So another key concept.
this idea of prefigurative politics?
Yeah. Prefigurative
I'll
politics.
keep hearing that.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So what is that exactly?
So basically, it's the idea that you should live by example.
Okay.
Demonstrate the viability of
Okay.
alternative ways of being,
Okay.
even within the existing system.
So it's not just about like waiting for some revolution.
Right.
It's about actually like,
It's about creating those alternatives now.
yeah, creating those spaces
Yeah.
of
right,
freedom
yeah.
and cooperation.
Yeah. Think things like community gardens,
Oh,
worker cooperatives, free schools, DIY healthcare.
so those are all like examples of prefigurative politics.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like planting seeds,
Yeah, it's like planting seeds of change.
nurturing them, watching them grow.
Yeah, and hopefully those seeds will spread.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together,
Yeah.
like the critique of authority, mutual aid, prefigurative politics.
Mm.
It all kind of comes together to create this like vision.
Yeah, it's a vision for a different kind of society.
Right. Okay, this has been really
It's
interesting.
been a great conversation.
Yeah, but I think we need to talk about
Yeah.
the criticisms.
Right, the criticisms of anarchism.
I mean, there's a lot of people who are skeptical.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important to engage with those criticisms
Right.
honestly and thoughtfully.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do that.
Okay, let's unpack some of those concerns
All right.
and see how anarchists would respond. Okay, so we're back, ready to tackle those criticisms of anarchism.
Yeah, I think this is where a lot of people get tripped up, right? Like, can a society without a state actually work?
Yeah, it's a big question.
And isn't it just gonna, like, descend into chaos?
Yeah, that's the fear, right?
I mean, one of the biggest concerns I hear is, like, who's gonna keep the peace?
Right.
Who's gonna protect us from, like, criminals if there are no police?
Yeah, that's a totally valid concern.
You know, it's a scary thought.
Absolutely, and anarchists recognize that,
Okay.
people need to feel safe and secure,
Right.
but they propose different ways of achieving that.
Okay, so how would that work?
Well, remember that principle of mutual aid we talked about?
Yeah.
That applies to security, too.
Okay, so instead of having, like, a centralized police force,
Right.
it's more about communities taking care of themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what would that look like in practice?
So think like neighborhood watch groups,
Okay.
conflict mediation circles, restorative justice practices, things like that.
So it's more about addressing, like, the harm
Right.
and, like, repairing relationships.
Yeah. And preventing future conflicts.
Okay, so it's like a more proactive approach.
Exactly. It's not just reacting to crime after it's already happened.
Right, because the thinking is if you can address, like, the root causes of crime.
Yeah, like poverty, inequality,
Yeah.
lack of opportunity.
Then maybe you can prevent it from happening in the first place.
Exactly. That's the idea.
Okay, but what about, like, those bigger threats?
Right.
Like, what if another country decides to invade?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
How would an anarchist society, like, defend itself?
Well, anarchists are generally opposed to war
Okay.
and militarism.
Okay.
They believe that violence just leads to more violence
Right.
and that true security comes from building trust and cooperation.
Okay, so more like a pacifist approach.
Yeah, you could say that.
But, I mean, what if someone attacks you?
Well, it's a complex issue.
Right.
And there's no easy answer.
Of course.
But I think anarchists would argue that a society that's based on
Yeah.
mutual aid and cooperation and decentralized decision-making
Yeah.
would be more resilient and adaptable in the
Okay.
face of any threat, really.
Interesting. So it's almost like having a more, like, flexible system.
Exactly. Yeah.
It makes it harder to, like, knock it down.
Yeah, because you don't have that single point of failure.
Right. Okay, so then how would, like, education work
Education, yeah.
in an anarchist society?
Well, anarchists generally favor
Yeah.
educational models that are more decentralized,
Okay.
more participatory, and focused on, like, empowering learners to think critically for themselves.
So less about, like, memorizing facts.
Right, less rote learning and more about, like, fostering curiosity,
Right.
creativity, a love of learning.
Okay, so it's more like,
Yeah, it's about giving students the tools to
Yeah.
learn how to learn.
right, and to, like, think for themselves.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, it's a different way of thinking about education.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, this has been, I think, really eye-opening.
It has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I've learned a lot.
Me too.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into anarchism,
Yeah.
what would you say is, like, the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that anarchism is more than just some utopian fantasy or a recipe for chaos.
Right.
It's a complex philosophy
Mm-hmm.
that offers a really powerful critique of power
Okay.
and a vision for a more just and equitable world.
So it's about questioning everything.
Yeah.
Embracing cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, taking action to create the world you want to see.
Absolutely. It's about putting those principles into practice.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us
Thanks for having me.
on this deep dive into anarchism.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Keep those anarchist gears turning.
Yeah, keep thinking critically.